All right, another day, another video for Jesse on Fire. We are going to talk about Conor McGregor exposing what I would consider to be a very large-scale deception that the UFC has been putting on the fans and fighters. When I say large-scale, I don't mean large-scale. It's like, it is large-scale, actually. It's a big deal, right? It's a really big deal. What they have been telling the public, which we now know is not true due to Conor showing the world that it's not true. And also, Francis has also said the same thing. I'll talk about that. And then I also want to talk about Ariel Helwani responding to Ariel's press conference that we talked about yesterday, where he went pretty hard at Francis. He went really hard at Francis. He went hard at the PFL, etc. And Ariel did like a response video. And I want to show you guys that. And then I will respond to Ariel's response because he went full heel Wani on him, dude. He went heavy on the heel Wani, and he made some really good points. And then he also made some points that I don't think were necessarily valid. That's what we're going to do. Now, if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you guys doing that. Click the button one time. I promise you, I am incredibly grateful for those of you guys who have done that, and for those of you guys who are going to do it right now. Best MMA community on the interweb. Thank you, guys. Also, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Yo Kratom, YOKRATOM. $60 kilograms. It is 1/5 the price of what you pay in the store. If you are a Kratom user, you can chop your monthly price by 1/5. But what? Turn it, what? I don't know. Reduce it by 80%, 90%, whatever that is. Excellent math skills, Jesse. I know. It's because I took my Kratom earlier. So, yeah, YoKratom.com. It is the most secure and reliable delivery ever. 2 days. It literally is as reliable as Amazon. 2 days, every time. All right. So, let's start with the Conor McGregor thing. So I watched the McGregor documentary, which was incredible. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And it reminded me why I love this sport so much. You know, it's one of those things that reminded me why I love this sport so much. And let me talk about that really quick, right? And then, but like just as a spoiler, what we're going to talk about in terms of Conor exposing them is this idea that they have to offer guys a certain number of fights per year. That's just not true, dude. Like, it's just not true, right? And so we'll talk about that in a second, but I also want to just say this, right? Like, so if you want to know at least why I love this sport so much, everything about it is in that documentary. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what your life is. It does not matter. Nothing matters as it relates to what the stakes of every fight are for these guys. Okay. Now, when I heard about McGregor Forever, the documentary trailer, I don't understand why they did this, by the way. The trailer shows Conor in a bed with a broken leg, and he's like, "It's McGregor forever, and don't you forget it." And I'm like, okay. And so for like whatever reason, I thought this documentary was going to be about his injury and him recovering from it. I don't know why I thought that. I honestly don't. But what it was actually about, it's like the end of Notorious, which is the best documentary ever. Okay. The best if you haven't seen Notorious, okay, like if you have not seen the documentary Notorious, I cannot stress this enough. It starts with Conor living in his mommy's house with D on social welfare. And it ends with him fighting Mayweather, okay? Like, they captured from welfare to $100 million fight, all of it, okay? It is so incredible. I loved it. And what McGregor Forever is like they just pick up at the end of that one and they just continued to current state, all right? It's like just a continuation of Notorious. I don't know why I didn't know. Like, it has the Khabib fight. Right? Has the lead up and then it has the Khabib fight. It has the lead up and then it has the Cowboy fight. It has a lead up and then it has a second Dustin fight, then the third one. It's got all the aftermath. It's like you get to be on the ride with Conor as he's building up to these fights, as he's training for these fights, as his team is there, the fight itself, the aftermath, and like, you know, I mean, obviously, I wish he would have won more of those fights. Right? I mean, he lost 3 of the 4, but the bottom line is like, it's good to see him like that, you know, for people who get this. The other thing too, here's a big thing I want to talk about related to having watched this documentary. And I really want to try to remember to not miss this, is I have a very different opinion of why he has been spazzing out, or why he went through this phase of spazzing out and punching people, you know, because I had a theory. It's not completely different, but I do think it is different. And I'm going to talk about that also. But, you know, you get to go on the ride with a guy where their team, what's their mental state? What do they look like in training? Like what's driving them and what are the outcomes? It's like everything is on the line for these guys. Now with Conor, of course, the financial piece is different, but it's still the same. When you get to see how devastated he is when he loses, it just reminds you he doesn't have to do this, right? He doesn't have to do this, and he does it anyway, and he's got just as much emotionally tied up in the outcomes as any other fighter, if not more. It just makes you root. I mean, I don't know. For me, I root for him. I love that guy, man. I just can't help it. I can't help it, dude. I can't help it. I am very emotionally tied to his journey. I really hope that he wins. And I mean, look, but now he's fighting Chandler. Chandler's my dude, man. Like, I text with Chandler about his fight. I talked to, like, Chandler's my guy. You know what I mean? Like, we've discussed this, that, and the other. Hey, dude, you should do this. And I mean, I love Chandler, so I can't root against Chandler, obviously. But just as a person who's like emotionally tied to like the sport and the way that it's very hard for me to like, I just have to root for both guys. It just is what it is. But like the drama, it's just so excellent to watch, you know? And what, you know, the part about exposing the lie that the UFC has been telling is when you heard, like, you have this idea that Conor says, oh, I want to fight all the time, and then he just doesn't fight, as if that's Conor not fighting. Conor wants to fight, dude. It's not him. It wasn't him. He was literally begging for a fight. You know, he fought Khabib, and then whatever was going on there, and then he finally, you know, got to fight against Cowboy. They weren't really clear on what, you know, there was a little bit over a year. I think that was, I don't remember the exact numbers, but there was, like, you know, there's a little over a year between those two fights. Conor comes back. He wins in spectacular fashion, you know, and then he's like, all right, let's go. He wanted to fight immediately, and he didn't get to fight. They would not give him a fight. Now, obviously that was because of the pandemic, but there were other people fighting, and he's begging for a fight. You know, when he said he was retired, that was out of frustration because they wouldn't give him a fight. Remember he called the president of Disney. Do you remember that? Like, Conor called the president of Disney, and Dana went, he's like, dude, there's no, you can't go above my head. And I remember that. And then you're like, why would they not be giving him a fight? I mean, it's kind of common sense in hindsight when you look at what the situation was. The financials are different during the pandemic. Like, they're scraping to hang on. They're in Fight Island. You don't get to sell out a crowd. You're going to make $10 million less for the fight if you do a McGregor fight than you would if you did it outside of the pandemic lockdowns. So I understand why they were putting him on the shelf. But at the same time, that has nothing to do with Conor. Conor's like, dude, I want to fight. He was trying to fight Dustin for charity. The only reason they even did the Dustin Poirier fight is because they agreed to do a charity fight, you know? And so, so it gives you a ton of respect for Conor, the fact that he just wanted to fight. He didn't care about the money. He just wanted to fight, and he couldn't get a fight. And finally, he had to basically organize one on his own for free for them to set the fight up. And so you go back to, hey, listen, man, I got to give these guys 3 fights a year. They could say no, but I got to give them 3 fights a year. No, you don't. They don't have to do that. And anybody on the inside that is willing to kind of talk has always said, they're like, that's not true, dude. You know, like, that's just not true. Like, there was obviously no need to give Francis 3 fights a year because Francis was begging for fights also. Like, think about it, dude. Like, Francis goes in there, he knocks a guy out in 20 seconds. You think he doesn't want to fight again immediately? Of course. These guys are like Francis wasn't even breaking a sweat in these fights. And he wants a fight. They won't give him a fight. Conor begging for a fight. They won't give him a fight. So this, like, they have to give him 3 fights a year. It clearly does not apply to the bigger guys. It's just not true. You know? It's just not true. Now, it might be semantics. It might be like these guys who make 20 and 20, right? You know, like, contractually, guys who make 20 and 20, the way that they get them to take that deal is because they're like, all right, well, at the even if you lose all 3 fights, you'll make $60,000 a year. Now, obviously, you got to pay out your guys, pay out everybody, and it breaks out to way less than that. But the way you can still tell a guy he's a professional athlete while only paying him 20 and 20 is it's like, but we have to give you 3 fights a year. So maybe it just applies to, like, the younger guys or the lower ranked guys. But still, it seems like a big deal to note that these big fighters, that's just not true. It's just not true. It's just not true. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know, man. It seemed very notable to me. And I could, I'm a guy where I watch documentaries, I get really emotionally tied to the person in the story. And that I could put myself in his position and feel that frustration where like you just came back, right? Like you did the Mayweather fight, you kind of fell off the rails, you lost to Khabib, and then like you got on the rails, you had an incredible camp, and you put a guy out in 40 seconds, and you're like, let's go, let's start this season, I want to rock, and it's your whole life, it's his whole life, and that brings me to the thing about him spazzing out on people, okay? So one thing that you saw in this documentary that was very crystal clear is that Conor McGregor is a guy where he has to train, okay? Like if he's training, he's happy. Right? He has to train. He's made that very clear, where if he can't train, if he doesn't have something he's working towards, his brain goes nuts, right? And you have to consider that his entire adult life, right? His whole adult life has been built around training for events, training for fights. And if you see what he looks, I mean, you didn't even need to see the documentary to know this, that Conor shines under the lights, right? Where he said, I feel free as soon as I'm in the octagon. I don't have nerves. I feel free. And so as he's training, he's got an opponent. He's thinking about that opponent. He's thinking about his skills. He's deeply entrenched in developing his skills and thinking about the guy he's going to fight, visualizing the event. And he centers his life around that, right? He centers his life around it. And before the Khabib fight, he said, after the Khabib fight, he said, this was the first time where I was telling myself, okay, I'm going to wake up at 8, and I wouldn't wake up at 8. I told myself I'm going to eat this and this, and I wouldn't eat those things. I'd eat other things. I told myself, I won't drink this, and then I would drink this. I made deals with myself. I cheated, and you saw the outcome. Now, obviously, one thing that I always comment on is the ability for fighters to rationalize losses in a way where they're like, it's because of this, this, and this for me. Now, I am certainly not doubting that Conor, it seemed very clear that Conor had a very different type of camp. Even aside from that stuff, he was in a very kind of like, he was, I don't know, like he really wanted to it was real negative energy war time, right? But the reality is he's fighting Khabib, dude. You can't just, that can't just be ignored. It's not always about what did I do wrong. It's like, dude, there are going to be people who are better than other people. No one can be impenetrably the best on earth. If Khabib went up to 170, there's someone that could probably beat him, right? Certainly if he went to 185, you know what I mean? Like there's always going to be a style or a guy that'll beat another guy. So you want to do the best that you can. You want to have a great camp, but there are styles, matchups, people that are going to beat the other guy. But nonetheless, right? So when Conor's not training, his life is not built around an event. It's not built around looking at a guy and specifically targeting him and then, being regimented. He said he goes crazy. And so when he punched that old man in the head, right? But that is in that same time period that we were just talking about where he was making deals with himself. He's getting drunk. He's not taking it seriously with the Khabib thing, right? And so he's not building his life around a regimented fight camp, okay? Now, no, there's no excuses for that or anything. I mean, the guy did run his mouth, but Conor's drunk. He's kind of not in a good headspace, whatever. Okay, well, when this stuff happened about Machine Gun Kelly, right? This woman on the boat, the Facchinetti guy, the Italian guy. Now, my old theory was kind of like, you look at these incidents and there seems to always be a really hot girl involved. I don't know if those things are connected, but like Machine Gun Kelly standing next to Megan Fox and Conor looked frustrated. He throws a drink at him and you're kind of like, what just happened? Fachinetti's got a dime piece wife, same type, brown hair, great bone structure, beautiful. And then he just like all of a sudden late at night punches Facchinetti in the face. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I thought that was a notable thing. Now, I'm not saying that those things are unconnected, but I think the actual culprit of him being in a state where that kind of thing happens is that he's not training for a fight, right? He's injured. He can't fight. He can't train. He can't train the way that he wants to. He's in a boot. I mean, when he threw the drink at Machine Gun Kelly, he was in a boot still, I think Conor is crazy. The way that he said he's crazy. He's like, in the documentary, he said it 100 times. He's like, I'm crazy, right? And he said that, directly, the reason that he's like Vincent Van Gogh about painting. That's the way he is about fighting. Well, you take fighting away from him, right? He's got all the money in the world. and he has no regiment around him now. So it's the same guy that he was before, before he became a star fighter, except take away the fighting and give him all this money, and he goes crazy. So, I don't know. I thought that was very notable to think about, is like, you take the fighting out of this guy and he's reckless, Anyway, that's pretty much what I got on the Conor thing. Now I want to move over to the Ariel thing. So I'm at, like, I actually recorded this before and I kept stopping him and then talking. I want to kind of let him get through this one time, and then I'll go through it again and respond to the different things one by one, because he makes a bunch of different points that I think are notable. So let's do it.
They don't put on those gimmick fights. They allowed Conor McGregor to fight Floyd Mayweather. They were a part of one of those gimmick fights. And then he's talking about the guy who is the lineal heavyweight champion, was not beat. He's like of your division, of your organization, the heavyweight champion, the one who 2 years ago you were saying, John Jones, you should run away from. That's the gimmick fight? You're shitting on your own organization by saying that. His last fight was in your own organization, and he beat the guy that you thought was going to be the next big thing at heavyweight. You promote slap fighting. You drag two truck drivers, one from Idaho and the other from Utah. You wipe their face. There's ketchup and mustard all over their beard. And you say, please put one hand behind your back. Here's some chalk. And good luck slapping the shit out of each other. You promote that. And you're above Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua. You rearranged an entire card because Khamzat Chimaev missed weight by 8 pounds, and fighters had to take fights on 24 hours notice just so that he can remain on the card. And you don't do that? It's a walking, talking contradiction. Everything coming out of that man's mouth.
All righty. So that is what Ariel said. And now we are going to go point by point and respond to these, because he made a lot of statements, some of which I think are valid, others are not. So let's rock and roll. Ariel, I will give massive credit to again. He has a fantastic way of structuring his arguments, and I do think that Dana and him are not fighting with the same rule set, though. That's very important to note, I think, in terms of like what. Because this looks as if they're debating each other, except that they're two different rule sets to the debate, right? Like, Ariel is responding to Dana's points as if this is some kind of directly logical argument, where Dana is responsible for promoting the UFC, okay? Now, when you are responsible for promoting an organization, you're going to spin it in the favor of your organization. Of course, you're going to say that you released Francis Ngannou when that's clearly not true. You're going to say that John Jones, your current champion, would smash Francis Ngannou when that is clearly up for debate, right? You're going to say you don't do gimmick fights when you do gimmick fights, right? So anyway, let's get into it. And then some other points that he said were actually just directly. Anyway, we'll get into it. So let's go point by point here.
They don't put on those gimmick fights. They allowed Conor McGregor to fight Floyd Mayweather. They were a part of one of those gimmick fights.
Yep, I made this point yesterday. That's a fact, of course. And it's the biggest gimmick fight of all time. That said, I will say that, so yeah, of course, that's a totally valid point. The only response that I have to that is that they're not the same. So when Dana makes a blanket statement, we don't do gimmick fights. Dana even realized that afterwards, where he's like, the Conor McGregor thing, that's a once in a lifetime thing because the fans wanted to see it, and yada, yada, yada. True, kind of, whatever. But there's a much bigger gimmick fight that they did that is a much better argument than this one, because the decision process and the decision criteria for this particular fight was different, which in my opinion very much not only came down to the money, but came down to this. This is going to be one of the biggest events ever. How many boxing fans are going to watch this that are not UFC fans? So how many new UFC fans are we going to get from going all in on this event? And so when you consider that, that's a totally different equation than Francis versus Anthony Joshua versus Francis versus Tyson Fury, which also those two things are very different. Because Anthony Joshua, I think Ngannou has a chance. Not a big one, but he could potentially win. Against Tyson Fury in a boxing match, I do not think he has any chance in hell at all. Like, I don't think that he has any chance of winning that fight. That's just my opinion in a boxing match, right? So that makes it, obviously a very different equation, right? And so, anyway, nonetheless, let's just keep on moving.
And then he's talking about the guy who is the lineal heavyweight champion, was not beat. He's like of your division, of your organization, the heavyweight champion, the one who 2 years ago you were saying, John Jones, you should run away from. That's the gimmick fight. You're shitting on your own organization by saying that.
Okay, so I agree for sure that anything negative that he says about Francis as a fighter is shitting on his own organization, for sure. Of course. That said, Francis has no professional boxing matches, right? So it is kind of a gimmick fight. But to Ariel's point, anything negative that he says about Francis not being a real whatever, or he lose to John Jones for sure, or whatever, he's a lineal champion. He never lost, right? He beat Gone with no ACL or MCL, like Francis talked about. Here's the real gimmick fight that I think that people are kind of passing over. How about the CM Punk 2 fights? How about 2 CM Punk fights? Okay? A WWE fighter with no MMA experience gets to fight twice in the UFC. That's a gimmick fight. You know what I mean? That's a gimmick fight. Those are big time gimmick fights that are unrelated to Conor McGregor versus Mayweather.
His last fight was in your own organization, and he beat the guy that you thought was going to be the next big thing at heavyweight. You promote slap fighting. You drag 2 truck drivers, one from Idaho and the other from Utah. You wipe their face. There's ketchup and mustard all over their beard. And you say, please put one hand behind your back. Here's some chalk.
2 hands.
And good luck slapping the shit out of each other.
And what I would say to that, I would assume what Dana would say to that would be that slap fighting and UFC are not the same thing, which is true, except that it is kind of the same. And not because slap fighting and UFC have anything remotely near each other in terms of the competition side of it, but they use UFC refs. They use UFC commentators. They did everything they could to make slap fighting just like UFC. And in that regard, it's a valid argument, right? It is. It isn't, but it is outside the UFC. But if I was Dana's attorney, that's what I would say. Of course, I'd be like, dude, the 2 things aren't the same. But my feelings about slap fighting have been very clear. I am not a fan. Feels very exploitive.
Promote that, and you're above Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua. You rearranged an entire card because Khamzat Chimaev missed weight by 8 pounds, and fighters had to take fights on 24 hours notice just so that he can remain on the card. And you don't do that? It's a walking, talking contradiction.
Okay, so on the Khamzat one, that one we're going to talk about real quick, because that, in my opinion, is not a valid point. I don't think that those 2 things have anything to do with each other. And like I've said, and I always feel kind of nervous even talking about this, because I realize they went real hard on anybody who entertained that this was done on purpose. But bottom line, okay, Khamzat comes out, a couple months ago and says, Dana told me after the fight that it was a good thing that this happened because everyone was going to hate the UFC if I ended up doing the Nate Diaz fight and I really hurt him bad. And it's like, oh, weird. Because that was the basis of my entire theory that they did this on purpose. That's exactly what I said at the time. Because if you really play it out, right? And this is why I will always remain suspicious that they did this on purpose and then kept it real quiet. Very tight circle. Khamzat, Dana, Hunter, like handful of other people, and that's it, to make sure it didn't leak. The reason why I've always been so suspicious of that is because think about how the fight actually went with Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson, right? Nate Diaz goes out, he puts on a good show, he's showboating, people are cheering for him, he has a great time. He gets on the microphone, he's choked up. Nate Diaz is choked up, dude. Like, Nate Diaz is emotional. He's having to actively swallow tears to not cry on the microphone. And that's the kind of thing that makes me love a guy like that, because he should feel like he should cry. He's going to cry right there. He's been in the octagon 20 years, right? 20 years. And he became one of the biggest stars in the sport. People love him, dude. He goes out there, he puts on a good show. He goes out on a win. He says he'll be back. He's not really sure if he really will, so he's crying, and it's like, it's moving. I love that shit, right? And that's the way it should be for a guy like that. A guy like Nate, a legend of the sport like Nate, a person who's left it all in the octagon every single time. Nate's never taken a minute of a fight off. He has never taken 1 minute of any fight off, not 1 minute. He's given everything he has to the sport, every single thing that he has to the sport. And he goes in there, and that's the ending. If the ending would have been Dana and Hunter setting him up to get absolutely smashed by a young up-and-coming killer like Khamzat Chimaev, who stylistically is the worst matchup in the entire organization for Nate Diaz, because he's going to be able to take Nate down, and he's going to probably be able to avoid getting submitted, and he's going to punch Nate in the face 1,000 times because Nate's the toughest guy on earth. He just beat him and 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 beat him. And that's the outcome. Because before the fight, everyone could say, like, dude, Nate's got a chance. What if Nate, da-da-da? What if Nate, blah, blah, blah? You remember Nate, blah, blah, blah. Everybody has a chance before the fight. And who knows, maybe Nate would have won. But if he didn't, right, which was likely, if he didn't, and he really got beat heavy, think about the media backlash. It was going to be catastrophic. It would have been one of the most damaging moments of media. It would have been, I mean, the mainstream media would have picked it up, right? Pictures of Nate's face, they would have made, as soon as that story caught fire, as soon as it really started to go, and the mainstream media is like, wait a minute, they put this guy in there against a guy he shouldn't have been fighting against, and he's coming off of losses, and they put him, and he's in a contract dispute, so they put him in there against this guy. And then this is what happened. What is wrong with these guys? Like, that would have been a thing that made them look evil. That made them look like bad people. The reason that slap fighting rubs people wrong is it makes them look like they don't care. It makes them look like they will get people hurt if it furthers their ends, right? Like, at least for me, that's why I don't like it. Is because it's like, dude, these guys are not athletes. These are not people who are like athletes. These are like desperate people, like run down people with bad lives who are like, oh my God, this is my opportunity to do da 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 da. And then they go out there and they get starched, right? Like, it's just not a good look. And then for Nate, it's like, this guy's giving you everything he has, and he just wants freedom. He's fought out his contract. He did what he agreed to do. And your thanks for that is the only way we're going to let you out of this contract is you're going to have to go out there and get absolutely pulverized. Like, that would have been a really bad look. And if I can, like I've said, every time I say anything on this channel where I'm like, I will say it again. If I can figure it out, they can figure it out. Or if I can figure it out, they've figured it out beforehand. And so I will never waver on this, that I'm not saying I know for sure, but I am suspicious that they did it on purpose, because it doesn't make any sense. Why would Khamzat miss by 8 pounds? He's never had a problem making weight. He misses by 8 pounds. Doesn't make any sense to me. So, and here's the other thing. Guess what? See what this says? They're going to make Khamzat versus Usman at 170 for 294 in Abu Dhabi. So there's that. Great fight, very exciting, and I'm looking forward to that. But that also, you're still going to let him fight at 170? I thought he has to go to middleweight. Weird. So he can make 170, huh? Anyway, so yeah, those are my thoughts on all of it, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me on the channel and following me and or subscribing and whatever. But don't ever forget, I own this. I love Francis. I love Dana. I love Ariel. I love Conor. I love Kamaru. I love Khamzat. I love Nate. I got nothing but love for everybody in the UFC except for one person. There's only one guy in the entire organization that I am like, And those who know. And those who don't worry about it, because I'm not going to say it publicly, because he's super fucking scary. He is scary. Very scary. And the reason I don't like him is because he's so scary. So, it is what it is. But that's what I got. I love you guys. Let's keep it real. Peace in the Middle East. Peace.